In my Father's house, there are many rooms. How often have we heard these words spoken at a funeral? And in those moments, those words bring us comfort and assurance and peace. We long to know that for those that we have loved who've suffered a great deal, that there's a place for them to go where there's no more suffering. And we also envision this for ourselves too, right? That there's this hope for us someplace else, a room all to ourselves. But here in John, Jesus is not simply telling them about the destination he intends for them. He's calling them into an abiding relationship with him now. In my house, we have a room that we call the living room. And the living room has the piano in it, and it has a glass top table in it, and it has all my breakables, and it has like my fancier chairs. And we don't do anything in that room. We certainly don't live in it. It's just a room that sort of looks nice. And I always dream, like I've always had one of these living rooms growing up, I always dreamed that I would sit comfortably on a couch and I would read a book and my cat would snuggle at my feet, and this is what life would be like. But this is not what actually happens. Life actually happens in the TV room. In the TV room there are when I was writing this, there were 5 empty Capri Sun bags, Legos, homework strewn on the table, and a half-finished jigsaw puzzle. And then the TV. Well, my TV room is a big mess. And I'm constantly saying to the boys, can't we pick up this place? And despite the fact that I like it, straight and organized, that's where I hang out too, in that mess. Because it doesn't feel all delineated and all straight, and everything's not in its place, but it does feel real. The room that Jesus calls us into is the room where there is actually stuff going on. Because life is more about Capri Sun bags and Legos and pristine tables. And it's more about frantically running from one place to another and stubbing your toe along the way than silently sitting there quietly passing time. And it's more about doctor's visits and broken hearts than it is painted family portraits. It seems like life is more about things falling apart than things actually staying together. And there's a point in the Bible where Jesus says, he's talking about his life. And he's talking about the suffering that he will face. And about how hard it is to be persecuted and rejected. Basically, Jesus is talking about how hard it is to be human. And Peter, he can hardly stand it when Jesus is talking about this. He says, God forbid it, Lord. Well, of course he says that. God forbid it. Isn't that what we cry out in the face of suffering? God forbid this? Not only take the cup, but take the cross also? Or sometimes people will say, well, this is the cross I have to bear. Which sounds as if this is the stuff of life that's been laid across our backs only to increase in weight and mass as we trudge our way through life. And there's very little we can do about the relief of this burden. Or, once my running partner, we were running and I was apparently running too fast, and she said to me, what are you trying to do? Slow down. Are you trying to run away from yourself? Which I wasn't. But there's a lot of truth to that we try to run or escape from the things in life that we just really don't want to deal with. Despite the fact that suffering is prominent in our Christian story, it is the peace that we most long to escape. It's the reason we cling to this idea of our heavenly cot somewhere else that we can go to. Over and over throughout this sermon series on heaven and hell, I've talked about how heaven is not really so far off. We've talked about how being good enough isn't what it's all about to get to heaven. And we've talked about how sometimes heaven and hell are actually very, very close to one another. And then last week we talked about the merciful judgment of God. But when it comes down to it, the stuff of life actually seems to get in the way of us being able to think that heaven or parts of heaven could really exist here today. So I'm glad when Philip says to Jesus, we don't know the way, Jesus. We don't know the way to our rooms. We don't even know what that means. We don't know where you're going, and we don't know how to get there. We don't have any idea what this life in you is all about. So let me ask you a question, and you'll have to sort of think it in your head. If you envision this room that you were to walk into, when you cross over that threshold, what's there? And who's there? And what does it feel like? Is it a place you love? Because it is, isn't it? Isn't it a place that you love? That you would stay forever? You know, I started off by talking about my TV room, how it feels so much more like real life, like my living room. But it's not about the mess that makes it lived in. It's about the love that has already happened there. That's what makes me return to it. That's what makes me sit there. That's where my family is. That's what will make me be there tomorrow, is what's the love that I know rests in that. Because while I ask you to envision what it would be like to walk into that room, love actually walks into us. Jesus takes the first step, crossing into our hearts, taking up That's kind of the way it happens in rooms. No worries. It's Laughter Sunday. But it's true that this is what Jesus promises, to walk into our hearts. Which means that when we walk around, we're carrying Jesus with us. That with Jesus dwelling in us, we are like little building blocks of heaven. Because we might not know the way, but Jesus does. I have a friend who is a pastor, and she tells this story about when her two boys were very, very young. They had kind of a long commute. She and her husband were pastors, and she had two boys sitting in the back, and they were driving home. And the older one, who's about 6, is picking on the younger one, and they're tired and they're grouchy and all that stuff. And so he's kind of punching them, and the younger one says to the older one, "How can you be so mean if you have Jesus inside of you?" And his point, even though he wouldn't have said it in this way, his point was his brother wasn't acting very much like a building block of heaven at all. The happy home of Jerusalem has actually been made in our hearts today. I think many of you who have been up here when you tell me that you're traveling know that one of my favorite things to pray when people are traveling is that Jesus goes before us to prepare a place and brings us back home safe again. And I love knowing that Jesus is before us and behind us and alongside us and within us. That Jesus knows the places before we even know them. And that if we are part of the building blocks of heaven, that we are part of the welcome and the protection, the comforting and the loving that Jesus does along the way in all those places. I know that when I've been doing this Heaven and Hell series, I've talked a lot about how heaven is here on earth. And what I pray that you would hear today is how very, very valuable you are to heaven and to earth, to God and to your neighbor. Because these words, in my Father's house there are many rooms, aren't really words for the dead at all. The rooms Jesus speaks of are living spaces, not dying spaces. The rooms are us housing Jesus, building the kingdom. And what occurred to me, it occurs to me today to say to you that the heaven on earth sense and the heaven in an eternal sense hold one very, very important thing in common. That in both of them, we rest in the presence of God. Because that's the hope, both for today and for tomorrow. I know it drives people crazy when you read a book and they leave you hanging at the end. But today I'm going to do that a little bit. So I'm leaving with you with a few questions to ponder. Where are you living in these days? Where are you making your home? And how is your path being made? Because your answer to those questions, where are you living, where are you making your home, and how are you making your path, may set you down right in the mansion of God.